Welcome to the Calm Analytics channel. This is Boris Tizengausen with you. Today is May 24th. Here are the main news stories at this moment. Another massive strike on Ukraine. These massive strikes are, in my opinion, the only thing Putin still uses to feed Z-patriots with information. The only thing that supports the logic that Putin hasn't lost the war yet, and the only thing that can still be sold to Russians in some way. Today, the main strike targeted Kyiv. It was really loud here for us. They hit with ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, Shaheds and Zircons. Today, Kinzhal missiles were launched at Ukraine, and the Russians even launched an Oreshnik at Bila Tserkva. In total, 90 missiles and 600 drones were fired at Ukraine. In other words, the Russians used up absolutely everything they could, everything they had stockpiled. And just like that, in one go, they launched it all at Ukraine. Here in Kyiv, residential buildings, schools, shopping centers have been destroyed, metro stations have been damaged, and the Lukyanivsky market burned down. Preliminary reports say 4 people have died and nearly 100 have been injured. My condolences to those who lost loved ones today, and of course I wish a speedy recovery to those who were injured. So here are the military targets, according to the Russian ghouls: the Kvadrat shopping center, the McDonald's that's there as well, and the covered Lukyanivsky market. I think many Kyiv residents have been to that market. I've been there many times myself. It's one of my favorites. Residential buildings, a tennis court burned down. The Chernobyl History Museum, the Museum of Arts, here they are, the military targets, the decision-making centers, according to the Russians. I came across a photo today. Let me show it to you now. A courier is delivering an order past buildings that are burning after being hit by Russian missiles. The photo is from the State Emergency Service of Ukraine. That courier, that's all of us today, dear Ukrainians. I'm reading dozens of messages. In Podil, the blast wave damaged a cafe that had just opened yesterday. People came out of shelters, they're already working, selling coffee, baking pastries. Other people, strangers, come to them and help. Some people go there specifically to buy coffee to support them. Ukrainians have come out of shelters, rolled up their sleeves, and got to work. It's impossible to defeat this nation. The bald underground scum still doesn't understand this. I think that by the time he realizes it, the coffin lid will already have slammed shut over him, and Ukraine will drive in the final nail. Ukrainians came out of shelters today, yes, straightened out their slightly rattled minds, and got going. We need to work. By the way, friends, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. We are fighting Putin's propaganda here. Let there be many of us here. That's also quite a serious blow to the Botox jellyfish. So make sure you subscribe. And, it's absolutely pointless to speculate here about what the reason was, what they committed this act of retribution for, as they say. There is no retribution, absolutely no retribution at all. They did it simply because they can. They have done this dozens and hundreds of times already. Therefore, judging by Putin's public statements and the nature of the strikes, the picture in his head is roughly as follows. Just a little more pressure, and the front will collapse. The rear won't be able to withstand the shelling mentally. People will take to the streets and start demanding that the authorities immediately end the war on Russian terms. That's how he sees it, you understand? He will continue as long as he has the opportunity. Ukraine's task is to eliminate this opportunity, and we are moving toward this goal quite successfully. He will only stop when he is physically unable to continue shelling Ukraine. And our task is to bring that moment closer and not break down ourselves before then. Now, a bit about the Oreshnik. They hit Bila Tserkva with the Oreshnik for $50 million. 3 garages burned down. Initially, they reported 2 garages, but as I understand it, the damage from this Oreshnik was even greater. The fire spread to a 3rd garage as well. I don't get it. According to the Russians, were there supposed to be 300 NATO generals sitting in those garages? Take that, NATO garages, with our $50 million Oreshnik. That's how we'll show you all. These tens of millions, they spend them to burn down the Lukyanivsky market for us, or, I don't know, to set garages on fire in Bila Tserkva. I remember when Yakutia was flooded. It was a real disaster. People there lost their homes, some even died. And at that very moment, Putin was once again launching a massive strike on Ukraine. They estimated that he spent almost $1 billion just on that one strike. And he doesn't care about Russians. Drown there, die in filth, in poverty, fight over expired food near garbage bins. He doesn't care. He doesn't care about you. What's more, Putin is also disposing of Russians with his own hands in this war. And with the money that's being spent on these strikes, they could have bought an apartment for every Russian in need of housing. Can you imagine? Every child who needs surgery could have had their operation, but the bold ghoul will never invest in anything that brings life and joy. All the money goes to death and suffering. And now, briefly about Oreshnik itself. In my opinion, this is the most expensive way to flush the budget of a fairly large Russian city down the toilet in just a few minutes. That is, 36 tungsten rods fall without a charge somewhere near garages or in a field. What is that for? Sorry. Oreshnik is now being presented in Russia as almost some kind of absolute weapon, unstoppable, hypersonic, and without any analogs. But essentially, Oreshnik is designed to deliver a nuclear warhead somewhere. But here's an important point. Some weapons have no analogs simply because no one else has created them, since no one needed such weapons. So the essence of the Oreshnik concept is not so much a powerful explosion, but rather the impact of these tungsten elements at tremendous speed. But the higher the warhead opens up, the greater the dispersion of these warhead elements. For striking a large area, well, maybe, but for precise targeting, that's an entirely different story. And without maintaining speed, this so-called super tungsten rain just turns into very expensive scrap metal. In other words, they still haven't solved the problem of how to fit a conventional charge into these projectiles so that nothing happens to it when entering the atmosphere and so on. They haven't solved it, they're just throwing these projectiles at us, which break apart into 36 pieces. As a result, you have a missile costing tens of millions of dollars and a few damaged garages. So, it's a really formidable demonstration of technology. There are no analogs because no one else ever intended to create such a weapon. And let me remind you, by the way, that all of this is a legacy of the Soviet Union. Naturally, Ukraine has no intention of surrendering. I probably won't be wrong if I assume that in the near future, Moscow will be hit with a strike that will be remembered for a long time. The previous attack will seem like nothing in comparison, and it is this strike that will make some Muscovites leave the capital. Ukrainian drones have already breached the air defense rings around Moscow, and I think Ukraine is definitely capable of giving all of Moscow a surprise. So, with a systematic inevitability that is terrifying for the Kremlin, Russia's oil and gas infrastructure continues to be destroyed. In fact, every night and every day, Putin's war chest is burning. We keep hitting, we don't stop. And today, an important oil terminal was struck. Ukrainian drones hit the oil loading dock at the Tormanj terminal, it was quite a night. Taman is located in the village of Volna, in Krasnodar Krai. The oil loading stand was damaged. This oil loading stand is used to transfer products into tankers. This terminal is one of Russia's key oil export facilities in the Black Sea region, and it also serves as a backup and distribution hub after the issues in Novorossiysk. So Ukraine is seriously targeting Russia's oil and gas infrastructure, but that's not all. Today, SBU drones struck the Vitorovo linear station in the Vladimir region. This is an important node in Russia's main petroleum product pipeline system. This station mainly handles the transfer of diesel fuel from refineries in central Russia to domestic consumers and for export. In other words, it's a key hub. It is through Vitorovo that major oil depots in the Moscow region are supplied, as well as the Sheremetyevo, Domodedovo, and Vnukovo airports. So, Ukrainians are showing the whole world that for every such strike by Putin, they will respond with an even more powerful, even more precise, and most importantly, an inevitable blow. Take that, you Botox scum. The next strike will be even more serious. In every episode, we have an important fundraiser for the defense forces of Ukraine. Today, we are continuing to raise funds for the first separate medical battalion, specifically for ventilators, which are currently in very short supply at the front for advanced surgical teams. Our medics have recorded a video message for you. Please take a look.
Апарат штучної вентиляції легень – не просто медичне обладнання, це шанс на порятунок та життя для пацієнта. В умовах бойових дій, де потік поранених часто є раптовим і непередбачуваним, таких апаратів потрібно дуже багато. До того ж, вони мають властивість ламатися та виходити з ладу від високого навантаження. Разом із каналом Бориса Тізенгаузена ми вже зібрали на 4 таких апарати, але цього все ще недостатньо для передових хірургічних груп нашого підрозділу. Тому ми оголошуємо збір ще на 2 апарати. Ми щиро дякуємо Борису та його глядачам за допомогу, небайдужість і увагу до питань порятунку українських захисників.
Let's help our combat medics. The link to donate is in the description of this video. There are options for Mono, Private, and PayPal for those who want to help from abroad. In this case, your donation could save someone's life. And as I say in every episode, a special thank you to you. You are simply incredible. Every time we complete another fundraiser, when I meet with our soldiers, when I realize that together we've already helped hundreds and hundreds of our defenders, I understand just how incredible you all truly are. I am very glad to have viewers like you. Thank you sincerely for being with me. And so it happens that from good people, we always have to move on to those who live in the territory of the Russian Federation. To the petty Gnedenish Medvedev. So Medvedev has called to intensify strikes on Ukraine. To quote, "We need to strike as we did today and even much harder. After all, ruins and grey ashes are left in place of their capital symbols." Medvedev stated that this demoralizes the enemy no less than the loss of a battle flag. Shlepan has finally woken up. If strikes on capital symbols, on the capital itself, really demoralized Ukrainians would have surrendered a very, very long time ago. And now we've reached the point where we are striking at the capital of the Russian Federation, and that is truly demoralizing. And as for that pickled gnome, he will definitely get what he deserves. Or rather, he already has, an absolutely useless, once temporary stand-in for Putin. He clearly understands that his only merit was simply being chosen as someone who looked even more pitiful and insignificant than Putin himself. That's how they ended up picking Medvedev back then. I think that deep down he realizes this, which is why he drinks himself into a stupor out of grief, and then again starts with, "We have to strike, we'll defeat everyone," and so on. Who are you going to defeat, you Ethel dwarf? Western countries are trying to pull away Russia's allies, especially its neighbors. That's why the current efforts to draw Armenia into a mistaken logic are aimed at hurting Russia as much as possible. This was stated by Lavrov. These are the news from the racetrack for us. Listen, they still look at the world through the prism of their own self. If someone does something, in this case Armenia, then it must be done either to harm Russia or, on the contrary, in Russia's interests. This is a complete denial of the agency of other states. This is pure imperial logic. Because they are still within the borders of the Soviet Union, their mindset, at least Putin's for sure, he called the collapse of the USSR the greatest mistake. I think his fixed idea was to reassemble the Soviet Union, to restore it, to create a Soviet Union 2.0, to go down in history. And Ukraine, that's why he hates Ukraine so much. Ukraine. It was Ukraine that got in his way. He stumbled right on the very first step with his bald head. He just crashed right into Ukraine's border, just like that. Putin still has some kind of phantom pain over the collapse of the Soviet Union. For Armenia, Ukraine, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, for some reason they are not allowed to have their own path. And if they do find their own path, it means they are supposedly doing it just to spite Russia. When will you finally understand over there in your swamps that nobody needs you? The only thing your neighbors want from you is for you to just leave us alone, so that you don't come to us with your booze breath and your Russian world, and with that toothless aristocracy of yours who can't even string 2 words together. By the way, Putin has also stopped being able to pronounce words. Yesterday I showed you a video. Well, here's another textbook news story from Russia. Metropolitan Matvey called democratic freedoms a threat to Russia. Metropolitan Matvey of Pskov stated that Russia, just as many centuries ago, faces a choice to bow down to the West with its democratic freedoms or to hold on to traditional Christian values. But why do they oppose one to the other? According to this Metropolitan, I'm not sure what his rank is, probably some kind of, at least an FSB lieutenant colonel. So, according to FSB Lieutenant Colonel Metropolitan Matvey, Western values are trying to infiltrate families, hearts, and win over children. And Western countries themselves are already openly promoting the worship of Satan. Oh God, well, I was waiting for you to finally start talking about Satan. I was thinking, where is it in the news? Here it is, worship of Satan. Listen, I know for sure that among all the countries in the world, I definitely have subscribers, even in Western countries. So how is this Satan worship going on over there for you? Can you somehow explain it? Do you go worship Satan with your kids in the morning, maybe go again during the day or something? How does that work? Where do you have those Satan obelisks standing? Tell us somehow it's not clear. In this short remark made by Lieutenant Colonel Matvey, the entire archive of Russian civilizational rhetoric is compressed into just a few sentences. To bow down to the West is a formula that has existed for several centuries already. It has outlasted czars, general secretaries, and now the balding ondatra. The scenery changed. Sometimes it was Latins, Freemasons, liberals, and now it's genders. The essence remained unchanged. The West is not a geographical concept. It is a demonological category. Here it's important to understand the mechanism of the church. Here the translator, as if from the language of a Western state, formulates a request for war, for mobilization. Then the church translates this request from the language of politics into the sacred language. The enemy literally becomes diabolical. And then, if you doubt that this is the enemy, you are already veering towards sin, meaning any disagreement with the party's policy and accordingly with the church's policy becomes apostasy. This is a practical management technology. And finally, the worship of Satan. This is, after all, a characteristic attributed to Western countries. It is a conscious removal of moral constraints. That is, if the opponent is literally a Satanist, then any means of struggle are justified. You can even sanctify things like bombing cities, torture in basements, deportations, the stealing of children. All of this ceases to be a crime because it becomes a spiritual feat. You are fighting against Satan. Do you think, why are they all speaking in unison? Remember, there was a moment when Russians all started talking in unison about Satanists in Ukraine. There were some reports that satanic textbooks or something like that were found at the positions of the armed forces of Ukraine. At that time, somehow they were all in sync. Medvedev started shouting about Iblis, Kadyrov about the Shaitan. They all started, so to speak, to dance along. And Sajin and Dyuzhev were also talking about Satanism there. Chechirina was on ultrasound, there, howling somewhere into space. Satan, all of that. That's when they stopped pretending that Ukrainians were one people with them. And they switched to this topic of Satanism. And if the enemy is a Satanist, then it's okay to bomb Ukrainian cities. In this logic, it's a godly deed. No, there are no people there, only Satanists. I have repeatedly said that the Russian Orthodox Church has done, I think, much more to justify this war than all Russian propagandists combined. So it should be understood that after the expulsion of Russian agents from Europe, representatives of embassies, consulates, legal intelligence, the Russian Orthodox Church remains. It is perhaps the main stronghold left there. Russian intelligence, after the Russian cultural centers were shut down. There are dozens of cases where representatives of the Russian Orthodox Church were even expelled from Western countries for posing a threat to national security. But in reality, it was for espionage. What are you all doing there anyway? After all, that's where Satan is. Go home. Your land is there, the land you've prayed over. Go sit in your own swamp. You see, in Western countries, and there's also news from the Middle East that directly concerns Ukraine. Now, I'll tell you about the negotiations between Trump and Iran. The chances of reaching a deal, first, Trump's position. The chances of a deal between the US and Iran or a resumption of hostilities are 50-50, Donald Trump stated. In other words, either yes or no. Either I'll strike or I won't. I think one of two things will happen. Either I'll hit them harder than ever before or we'll sign a good deal. That's what Trump said in an interview with Axios. He also added that on May 23rd, he met with his negotiators, discussed everything, and that Trump might even make a decision today, either to resume the war or to conclude a deal. Moreover, Axios writes that it's likely about resuming the war, while the Washington Times writes that a peace agreement might be signed. Today? Yes, we'll see. Why? It directly concerns Ukraine. The thing is, in this memorandum, which apparently has already been approved by both sides, there are several important points. Axios published this memorandum, and it contains the following points. The opening of the Strait of Hormuz and clearing it of mines, lifting the blockade of Iranian ports and sanctions on Iranian oil, the start of negotiations on lifting other sanctions and unfreezing Iranian assets, and ending the war between Israel and Hezbollah. And the nuclear issue is left out, although there is mention of Iran's commitment not to develop nuclear weapons and to halt uranium enrichment. Well, that's all well and good in words, but in practice, things could turn out completely differently. So in return, the US would lift restrictions on Iranian ports and sanctions on Iranian oil. And at this point, the Botox Medusa's jaw should really drop for good, which lately has been dropping from time to time anyway. The main outcome is that if this agreement is implemented, Iranian oil will officially return to the global market in large volumes. For Russia, which was practically praying for a major war in the Middle East to drive up oil prices, this could be a very serious blow. So just imagine additional volumes, now legal with sanctions lifted, of Iranian oil flooding the market. And naturally, oil prices will go down. In this scenario, Russian euros could drop to $50. But even that is a very optimistic figure for the Kremlin. India and China, which are currently the main buyers of Russian oil, will get an alternative in the form of clean, sanction-free Iranian oil. And of course, they will start putting even more pressure on Moscow, demanding even bigger discounts. And if you take into account the costs of Putin's shadow fleet, grey insurance schemes, and logistics, Russian oil, if it remains under sanctions, then Russian oil could collapse to as low as $35 per barrel, and at that point, Putin is no longer making a profit. In fact, he's already operating at a loss. That's why the underground ghoul is so furious. He realizes he doesn't have much time left, so he lashes out at Ukraine, trying in any way possible to claw out terms from which, if only he could cobble together at least something, even the slightest hint of victory in this war. But Ukraine is not giving up. And Ukraine will still surprise you in such a way that you'll jump into your bunker for good and seal yourself in from the inside. And then, just to make sure you little scoundrel, never crawl out, they'll weld it shut from the outside too. Well, friends, take care of yourselves, take care of your loved ones, and subscribe to this channel. Let's help our combat medics. The link to donate is in the description to this video. Remember, your donation could save someone's life. Wishing everyone a peaceful day and glory to Ukraine.